All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Real Talk Office Hours, hunting for the silver linings with George, Corey, and our special guest Henry Soo from Vancouver, BC, on this Monday, May 25th, 2020, and brought to you by Startup Grind, the world's largest startup community. We operate with 600 plus chapters in over 125 countries. Startup Grind operates with a mission to educate, inspire, and connect, and we are driven by three core values: make friends, not contacts; help others before you help yourself; and give before you take. Now, the pandemic has been and will continue to be for some time the great global leveler. And as entrepreneurs, we do our very best for our businesses, teams, and families. And we should be informed, rational, analytical, and rigorous in our thinking. We should also learn to control our biases as they emerge in various circumstances. We invite you to join us every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, live at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we track the intersection of these biases, facts, and action through our review of global financial markets, alongside check-ins and real talk with Startup Grind chapter directors, entrepreneurs, and ecosystem stakeholders from across the world. No one has a crystal ball, but if we keep our eyes and ears open and pay attention, we may be able to see around the bend, and with some luck, spot the silver linings that are around every cloud. If you missed the live events, you can view the recordings at startupgrind.com/grand-rapids, where you can also download the reading notes from the show, as well as find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you find your favorite podcasts. Now, before I introduce my partner in crime, a bit of housekeeping. Comments made and views expressed by all participants in this podcast are not intended to invite or incite individuals, entrepreneurs, or investors to buy or sell financial assets, real assets, commodities, futures, and/or options. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform, not to trade or to invest. If you feel compelled to trade and/or invest, please call your broker. Remember, however, risk is everywhere, even when you think that you're not taking a risk. Now, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you George Kitsanos to get us started with a catch-up of what the global markets have been thinking the last couple of days.
Good afternoon if you're in the US. Good morning if you are in San Francisco or Vancouver. Hello, good evening if you're in Europe, and good evening if you're in Asia. We hope that all of us are healthy and safe. The purpose is not to win the war, the purpose is to remain alive. Keep that in mind as we go through the next several months and quarters of volatility. In our review, we'll go through foreign exchange, bonds, equities, commodities, as we normally do, looking for the silver lining, hunting for this bit of news that makes difference. As entrepreneurs, business owners, and managers, as well as investors, we take risk every day. The financial markets tell us, each one in their own way, what the market is thinking and discounting. Starting with foreign exchange, you can see that today being a bank holiday here in the US, the markets have not moved substantially, particularly when it comes to the major currency pairs. The dollar is relatively stable against the euro, the yuan, sterling, the Aussie dollar, Canadian dollar, and the Swiss franc. And the reason for that is, of course, the holiday, but more important than that, we have no major important news or deviations for the time being. When we look at rates and bonds, starting in Asia and the Pacific, we see that bond yields for the 10-year bonds have remained stable. Nothing has changed really compared to Friday's close. And the reason for that, of course, is the fact that major trade flows haven't really changed and news have not changed. We're following on the last few weeks' optimism about opening up of the global economies. And this is essentially reflected across the board In Europe, again, you can see that the yields are stuck in a small range of trading. And I want to remind you that bonds are indications of sentiment and decisions made by conservative investors. Let me remind you that an investor who invests in a bond has two types of risks: the repayment of his or her principal and the regular repayment of the coupon that this bond pays, either on a semi-annual basis or on an annual basis. In other words, a bond investor will be more thorough in her or his analysis of the underlying risks than an equity investor. In the US, we have also seen that yields remain, in the Americas, we've seen that the yields remain unchanged as well. When we go over to the commodities, we see relatively little volatility as well. And the reason remains, of course, the holiday here in the US, but more important than that, the fact that we have no news, no major news coming over the weekend, except the fact that China is changing its policy orientation, and we'll come to that in a moment. Gold is again around 1750. Copper is at 240. The key issue here to remember is that gold is considered to be a safe haven, whereas the copper trade, copper is an industrial commodity. When you see the price of copper rise, you have to know that the world industry is moving forward in a positive direction. We showed that chart this last week as well. Here you can see where on a 5-year horizon, copper is trading. We hit a high of about 330 back on the 8th of June in 2018. We hit a recent low at about 217 on the 20th of March, and we're now about a third recovering. What you should pay attention here is the price of copper in relation to what is going on in China, and we can talk about that in a moment. When we look at the stock markets across the world, we will see that in Asia, we had a mild positive day. The change has been from a high of 1.7% in the Nikkei to about 0.1% in Hong Kong. The S&P 500 in Australia was up 2%, and overall the market in Shanghai, the Shenzhen index, was up 0.14. Allow me to focus for a second here on the Shenzhen index. When we look at the 5-year horizon, we see that we had a high of about 5,335 on the 12th of June of 2015. We had two lows. One was the 29th of January in 2016 with that global correction, and then another low back on the 28th of December at 3,000 roughly. We are hovering at around 50% level from the high. Keep an eye on this, as statements out of China are suggesting a major change. I want to look at a moment in West Texas Intermediate. West Texas is trading about $33, $34. Brent is solidly above 35. And the reason for that is it seems that concerns about storage are being managed. We have seen that most OPEC and non-OPEC members have reduced production. And we've seen also that many of the Texas producers have reduced, including the Canadian shale oil producing reductions. A couple of points to remember after we look into the global markets, the equities markets. On China, the big recovery, or rather change in policy that we've seen coming out of China, at least in public domain, is that there is a shift in policy. And I would like our speaker later on to give us some idea of his reactions, of what he expects out of this policy, particularly because of his proximity to the region. Beijing is pursuing a new development plan. The plan is aimed at boosting domestic production, consumption, market, rather than export-led growth. As President Xi said, for the future, we must treat domestic demand as a starting point and foothold as we accelerate the building of a complete domestic consumption system and greatly promote innovation in science, technology, and other areas. Analysts suggest that Beijing is moving towards giving up the great international circulation strategy that adopted in the 1990s that helped fuel its growth to become the world's second largest economy. This is a very interesting change. We know that has been going on for some time, so there's nothing really new here, but this renewed emphasis is quite telling, especially in light of the juxtaposition with this administration here in the US. With regard to Hong Kong, on Monday, today, in other words, in Hong Kong time, the top Chinese diplomat, Xi Feng, called on envoys and business chambers to avoid doing anything that would undermine their interests. He urged them to back the national legislature's plans to install a national security law in the city. Clearly, this is an effort by the national government in Beijing to explain the meaning of the law, but it is quite clear that this law could well be in place by August, according to the South China Morning Post. So keep that in the back of your mind, because that's an important little note. Finally, we have some great news about a little company based in Israel. It was a startup. The startup is called Sonovia. They have gone through tremendous testing here in the US, and it seems that the Federal Drugs Administration will allow it to commence its sales here in the US. Tests show that it has a 99.9% virucidal effect, meaning the fabric works to deactivate viruses so they cannot enter host cells after an exposure time of 24 hours. So this is great news, and it is also great news because it follows on what we heard from a study in Singapore. The Singaporeans, the researchers have confirmed that COVID-19 patients are not infectious after 11 days of getting sick, even though some may still test positive. A positive test does not equate to infectiousness or viable virus. The virus could not be isolated or cultured after 11 days of illness. This is great news. I hope it is confirmed. Unfortunately, this is a small sample. Only 73 patients were studied. So again, medicine is doing its best. Last point. We always remain skeptical. We always focus on skepticism. We always focus our skepticism on analysis and facts, data. Please do not be complacent. Thank you, Corey. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, George. Yeah, that's a really great point, and it lands right in the purpose of why we're checking in with our global fellow chapter grind directors is because what we see out in our neighborhoods, like wherever we're at, isn't always the case across the planet, and we need to remember that this is a global effort, and we can't sleep on it at a global level or local level. Um, uh, Related to the some of the news items that you brought up, especially that Israeli innovation, and then also some of the medical research that's being done. It's just incredibly inspiring the speed of innovation that we're seeing like in front of us every single hour. It's almost, if you pay attention to it, it is almost every hour. It's pretty wild. That's a sharp looking mask too. Like
Yes, for the benefit of our audience, I have actually put that up as it appeared in the Jerusalem Post today. You can see it.
And there was an interesting comment on a Masters of Business podcast by the guest from the bar rescue host, and he said, main reason why people aren't wearing these masks is out of vanity. So it's important that that mask looks pretty good. Not only is it effective, but it makes you look good too. But yeah, the speed of innovation, really impressed. And that's also what we were excited about hearing. The last couple of guests that we've had on from around the world, they've spoken about what's happening in their neighborhoods with regards to this innovation to meet the challenge. And with all of that said, I'd like to introduce everyone to Henry Soo from Vancouver, BC. Thanks so much for taking some time to be with us today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you're one of the people that I was able to spend most of the time with and get to know at Global in February. So great to see you again. And I wonder if you could give everyone the benefit of an introduction, like not just like what you're doing
Yeah.
with Startup Grind, but also what is it that you do outside of Startup Grind?
Okay, so just a quick preview. So I spent 15 years in China doing like FDI. That was after the dot-com crash in '99. And during that period of time, I was doing a lot of market entry. I came back a couple of years ago, working locally right now to do a lot of like localization. That was mostly with affluent Chinese that were landing in Canada. And through that process, a lot of questions like where do I live, where do I go, where do I put my kids, like where do I invest, what are the opportunities, what do I need to do next. And I found that there was a lot of fragmentation in the market, a lot of companies needing capital but not even knowing that the capital was in country or was coming in country. So a lot of work we're doing is on the educating part. And through that process, a company called Settley came out of that. And so it's an on-demand concierge platform, and we connect, we call it immigrant newcomers, so life's essentials. So in Canada, every year they spend 1.9 billion on settlement programs. And so most nonprofits are fighting for that capital, but for the affluent Chinese that are more educated, may have run a factory in China, run a business in China, it's more so for their family to get that settlement part taken care of, and they're used to paying. So we're actually reversing the model and getting them
Mm-hmm.
to pay, but increasing the efficiencies and making the friction go away. And in terms of local service providers, we provide a vetted channel of leads. So you don't get a Chinese person coming to you like, tell me all the services, tell me everything that you sell, tell me everything about Startup Grind, every chapter in every chapter in the world. What do you do? Like, how do you streamline, make it very easy? And I always use the kind of like the Apple website analogy. It's very simple on the front, or Google, but so much happening in the background. And so we start to get them started, and through that process, we provide them other like options and channels. So let's get you started first, figure what you need, do that matchmaking, and really break through the culture and language barrier.
And I imagine that you're really banking a lot on trust there then as you build these relationships.
Yeah, very, very much so. Because in China, I was working with the local government. We build investment center, and typically, a lot of times in China, they build because you can, not because you kind of. We say build because you can, not because you should. So feasibility, a lot of things get kind of like thrown out the window. But like you're talking about like speed of innovation, like we tell the startups here, everything in China is a startup. It's survival every day. So outside of North America, it's nothing new to them. It's just another challenge, just another thing to
Mm-hmm.
add onto the plate. And so, but really, a lot of things that we're doing right now is also looking at immigration programs. So working with the immigration lawyers that have like 51 categories of immigration. And I'm like, I want A, B, and C. How do you make it into like a menu that's very like very template, very easy for you to carry out, establish the trust, and then look at other avenues that you can do business. And so like, what you mentioned is like trust is like, you know, the way that business is done is different in different countries. And so a lot of that has to be kind of like mediated and educated. And then once you have that, okay, now I want to get started. What do I do? And we take the same approach with running the startup grind chapter here, find out like what people are really missing, finding those pieces around the world. And I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out of this because of everyone is virtual now, is that we have a lot more connections with even other chapters that we may not have like put a lot of emphasis on previously wanting to do, but was always like, I have to deal with like, I have to deal with my family first, right? I'll deal with other family. I'll deal with their family when I see them at another event and whatnot. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of like opportunities open from that. And even a lot of startups here asking, okay, even within outside my own backyard, where are the other opportunities, whether that's India or whether that's like Iran or other countries where, you know, people are also looking for opportunities. So we've taken that model and connected that between, you know, Vancouver and other countries.
I think that's a real powerful model, and you know, taking the lead on something like that is only going to benefit your community. You know, we keep on talking about how this is so global, as it's affecting, you know, everyone across the planet. And then George had mentioned earlier, you know, now with the globe opening up as far as business is concerned in different countries and cities, the complacency that we're seeing among some people in different populations, it's nice to hear that you have a community there that's like, okay, now's not the time for complacency. Like, we're paying attention to what's going on the other side of the planet. Like, let's move, let's get connected. That can only benefit everybody. So how long have you been operating that chapter in Vancouver?
The chapter's been around quite early. I think it was like 2003. So there was a lady that was running it before that moved to Australia. Then another chapter director took over. So I was helping him as a co-director. And then really just like delve into, because like Vancouver is an ecosystem, there's so many players here that what I feel there's a lot of noise that, you know, a lot of information my approach is to get it from the source, you know, so like instead of regurgitating other people, why don't we just ask them or kind of go there and experience it? And that's kind of like one reason that we ended up in going to San Francisco. And so like Vancouver is a hub, we're very close to San Francisco. We're also very close to Asia. And so trying to mix those two and coming up with you know, like what would you say, like a competitive advantage.
Sure.
And just want to like give a shout out to like our tech, the BC tech here. They've been very proactive, even lobbying government, and I've been on a lot of calls with like our national angel association, and they've been lobbying the government as well in terms of like give more tax credits to angels, let's train more angels. So let's get this economy started. Instead of getting like handouts, we are getting a lot of handouts, but as citizens, we're gonna pay. We're gonna pay in the end. But in terms of like each layer, like that speed of innovation of government has never been seen before. Right. You see a lot of companies that, yeah. So on two sides, like in terms of like opportunities and also challenges, I think opportunities like Vancouver has a very strong film industry, also gaming industry. So EA was here quite early. Also, there's a company called Gabam that was based in Vancouver. And then we have like anchor tenants. We don't have really two, maybe three. Three unicorns. So one's like Slack, one is like Hootsuite. But a lot of those companies, the challenges, even like when they were getting started, is scale. And our biggest challenge here is companies leaving. And, you know, we do get a lot of American companies coming in because of the HB1 issues with visas. And the federal government has really pounced on that by taking advantage, try to get skills. So they have a global skills program. They have where you can, if you're like an AI machine learning guy, you can get your work permit within 10 days.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible opportunity for Canada, right?
It's not good for you guys, but but there's a lot of stuff that is happening between like here in Seattle as well. Like with what's happening in San Francisco, a lot of people are migrating more kind of like because of the costs, and people working remotely. You don't need to kind of like be in San Francisco anymore, even more so now. So.
Well, you brought some interesting points up here. As far as, so first, you have a lot of experience in Toronto. You said you spend a lot of time in TO there. And you talked about how the BC government is answering the call, right, to help spur and support innovation, the handouts, et cetera, supporting small businesses. I was reading a lot about the rent subsidies,
Yes.
for renters and so on. And it does appear from the outside looking in that there is some decent amount of coordination among the different provinces. Now, you just brought up the unicorn like Slack, right?
Yeah.
And they're fairly well distributed. They have a really great office in Waterloo. So is that a model that that Vancouver is seeing a lot of coordination throughout Canada? That this coupled with the advertising from the government of like, hey, talent, come here.
I think the communication is being like, they've been jumping on a lot of calls, a lot of like Zoom calls and whatnot. And so really the tech community is also educating them as well. In the very beginning, it was kind of like a very, very broad, very macro kind of view, but tech was kind of left out because like a lot of the programs, if you didn't make revenue, which most tech companies don't necessarily have revenue, you can't get those programs. And so BC Tech Association here, every week they do like a call. They update everyone on those programs, and here's a platform, like voice your concerns, voice what's happening with you. It gives them a platform to understand what's happening in the province as well. And then they do the calls with like other groups across Canada. And then in terms of like the banks, because we only have like six banks here, it's very easy to coordinate in terms of like, okay, business development of Canada. Okay, you're going to be responsible for dishing out this money. You're going to be the person vetting these companies, right? And so, I mean, the traditional industries like restaurants and stuff like are decimated. The industries like tourism are decimated, which is like a big industry here. And in terms of opportunities, where I see a lot of opportunities is in AR, VR. What's unique is like, in terms of adoption, AR, VR in China, its adoption rate is very, very high. But here locally, I didn't realize until a couple of years ago that there's over 260 at that time AR, VR companies. And every year we have AR, VR conference here. And so you get the people from enterprise, talking about how they're using those products in their own industries and their own verticals. So it's quite interesting. Like, the headsets are very expensive, but like, where's the business case to use this product? And so I think even more so with like what's happening with remote work, and that is going to really take off in Vancouver. And two companies, one called Finger Food, they actually got bought up by Unity. So it's an American company. So another case of a Canadian company bought by American company. And then another company called that's making goggles, AR, VR goggles. So it connects with your smartphone, and then you can kind of like track your progress swimming and whatnot. And I can't remember the name of I think they're called Form. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they raised about 12 million just recently. And then in terms of sentiment, I think investor sentiment.
Henry, before we move on to some of those questions, which I'd love to get into, especially since you're so close to your community, I know that George has a couple questions on some of the things you brought up.
Okay.
Henry, thank you for this detailed explanation and introduction, essentially, of what you have been doing. How valuable has your experience in China been as you're dealing with this influx of immigrants in Vancouver? That's the first question. And the second question that I have in the meantime is angel investors. Probably BC and Vancouver authorities are the first ones to be actively involved in seeking and supporting angel investors. We have not seen this model anywhere else yet. And when I go back into Margaret O'Hara's book about the code, how essentially the collaboration between the government and Silicon Valley started in the 50s, and this opportunity was supported and facilitated by government policies, I keep on wondering, how successful is this model? What do you see in terms of angel investors' participation or collaborating with government?
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. In terms of Asian sentiment, there is a lot of we could say like bias in terms of really trying to is either hate or is love, right? So you love the money, but then you hate a lot of things that are happening right now. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is educating, because there's just people, right? And different systems, different ways of doing things. And if we say like be compassionate, okay, be compassionate by being tolerant. Be tolerant is not putting a label, and then be wise, not smart. And that's even to the entrepreneurs. So like how do I, instead of like being cunning, like how do I barter? How do I trade services? Like how do I keep things moving along? And what they call like the cockroach approach. So to stay alive, but not to stay alive, but like how do you make a new reality happen? And this is just move that process much faster. And as a tech company, I think that's how you should be anyways. Like you should never be complacent sitting around. You always be talking to customers and learning more. And then in terms of your question about angels, typically like here has always been like a mining kind of place. So like everyone's kind of in the junior mining stocks and whatnot. And so like that's educating that that audience on in terms of tech and where some of those applications that could be used in mining has helped a lot. Like for example, the biggest mining company here is called Tech. And so they're using like drones and whatnot, to do like deep drilling kind of mining and exploration. And another company in Okanagan here, about 4.5 hours away. It's kind of like wine country over here. And they're using drones as well, but more for agriculture, agri-tech, and using that to look at moisture levels, sun levels, pesticides, whatnot. And so when you have an application that is very easy for them to kind of like come on board, one of the challenges is that the angel money is still very, it's not enough. And so in terms of like the China side, we're working on 2 levels. One is like if you landed in Canada already, like seed money. So like 500,000 that you could put in a company here that could really help that company move along, and also help them with network in China, for example, opening markets for them. The other is people that are just like coming over. They might not be institutional and they might not be typical VC fund, but there's a lot of education that has to happen on there. That's not like really happening. We see a lot of like silos. So different ethnic communities that are just kind of doing their own thing. And people go like, I want to go to China. I'm like, China's sort of here. If you can serve the people here, think about how much economic prosperity that could happen in country. And these people are highly motivated. They just don't know, like, okay, I want to go buy what you're working on. What do I do? What's the next step? And so even them, they're pushing the government much faster. And so it's not just about like taking investment dollars, but like how do you as an ecosystem progress forward where everyone kind of benefits in some way? It might not be monetarily, it might be like awareness, it might be, in other ways. And really taking the startup approach of our whole startup grind thing about give first. This approach that I took in China before joining Startup Grind, and it worked really well because it does build trust. And where you don't have like agenda, then everybody opens up and people open up and go, I want to get my children in Canada. How do I do this? Do you know this person or that person? I said, I don't know. I can find that person. We'll find the procedure. Things are done very differently over there, but we can get it done if you're highly motivated and you trust me to go do this. Of course, there's always like, I want to do it my way. Then it's like, that's never going to happen in anywhere, right? And so it's like, if you trust the process, because a lot of it is transparent, and even companies coming over here that are for Dentons, there's a big law firm here. They're like, does Dentons own the building? And we're like, who cares if they own the building? Get the work done for you, because they're always looking for like tangible, and we're more working towards intangible. And the tangible is the relationships between people. And once that layer is broken, then it's very much, everything kind of opens up for everybody.
That's really interesting to hear about the coordination and the intentionality of the government's participation in the ecosystem. We were just talking with Arzish from Islamabad, and that conversation was really enlightening because over there the experience has been that it's much more of an organic, like, development as far as the ecosystem. And then the Ministry of Technology came on, kind of afterwards, and it's like, oh man, we need to put some gas on this fire. So that's really interesting. So you were just about to, before I cut you off, you're about to get into kind of like what's going on, taking the temperature of the people within your ecosystem, maybe some of your startup entrepreneurs, as well as the investors. Maybe there's one or two you want to highlight, or what the conversations you're having with them is.
Sure. So I'll just roll off some numbers to give you an idea of like how things are with COVID. So like 80% of the tech companies here have like negative revenues, which is understandable because everyone's kind of inside. And of like the 50% of them, 30 is by 30% or more. And in terms of what they're doing is they're extending runway. So a lot of the discussions that really are around how to extend runway, how do you create relationships, and how do you like learn fast. Everyone's like kind of like at home now, so it's like there's a constant curve of learning. And that's like learning of other businesses, other companies. They're also like in terms of like COVID, kind of like turning to making masks and turning to making ventilators. And LNG is a good example of a company. Another company that got bought, like the one I mentioned that got bought by the U.S. is they're like they have their day job and then they have their job at night. And so it's very kind of enlightening to see different people working together. But we kind of expect that in tech. Traditional industries may be a little bit more conservative, but then the energy is really kind of spreading really quickly, and the environment is very conducive really to business. And I think it's really pushing the barriers of what people think they can do, and seeing what is out there that they can collaborate. And I think that's the biggest lesson and takeaway that I've got from the companies coming, like talking to us. I mean, companies are coming to like raise money and go, I want to raise money, but you have no traction. So it doesn't matter if there's COVID or no COVID, right? It's just like, this is not a challenge, right, for you. So it's kind of like you had no money before. So it's not too big of a challenge. In terms of like the companies that, again, like with the HB1 issue, a lot of remote co-working spaces. And so companies like say Gusto that are renting space from a company called Terminal.io. And so what they do is like they hire engineers, and part of like the global skills program that we have here. And then also like we have another program called Startup Visa. So like if you go through 3 channels, so if you're an accelerator or if you're like an angel investor group, then you can go vet them. And if they put money in your company, then companies are actually coming in country as well. Because currently there's 100,000 tech entrepreneurs, tech people, I say, not tech entrepreneurs necessarily. And that's going to grow to over 300,000 by 2023. And so there's a big gap. Like there's a big story. And then also the big thing last year was about diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of women. Yeah, there's a lot of women working in tech in Vancouver. There's a company called Fin AI, and so they're in like the fintech space, and it's like women CEO and whatnot. So
you have that organization, Move the Dial. That's a Canadian organization. To increase the prevalence of women on boards and women in education and tech, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, we have like women in tech here. There's a lot of like local organizations. Like there's so many that are sprouting up, and we're really looking at like how can we collaborate more instead of like doing like kind of like playing in the same pool, and find the gaps that we're missing. And I feel like the biggest gap is like Series A. And so here you may get like, oh, get your traction, you get Series A. It's not here. Put it in escrow. A lawyer would say put in escrow, and then subject to your criteria that we negotiate, release the funds. And so there's a big opportunity there because of like we have a lot of Persian entrepreneurs here. We have a lot of Indian entrepreneurs from like Punjab and that are do a lot of like software and whatnot. And then a lot of like of course, a lot of the Asians, like the Koreans and the Chinese and Filipinos and everyone that are coming through. So there's enough every there for everybody. It's just like, how do you streamline that process? And I think that,
I'm sorry. You can finish that thought. Yeah.
So BC Tech has done a very good job at that. I was really kind of like surprised in terms of like bringing the community together. And a lot of groups coming every week, just like, okay, this is what we're working on. These are our challenges. Like, like
Well, yeah, the ecosystem doesn't build itself, right? And so you have to have someone, helping inject that energy and
yeah.
consolidate some of those resources. Now, you said something a little bit earlier about companies doing their best to raise some funds or to make the whatever funds they have, make the runway last as long as possible. Now that we're a few months into this, are you hearing anything about like mergers or acquisitions being a means to survival?
Um, there has been like some companies coming forward that have had those kind of like thoughts. Like again, it's like collaboration. You're seeing a lot of like pro bono stuff more than like M&A stuff. Like I'll help
Okay.
you, and like at some point we're gonna get over this. And so it's like if either I take the business and then you die, or I take the business and or I die. And so you're seeing a lot of collaboration, cross collaboration, even across verticals that we never maybe expected before, because it's coming really down to like the people level, because
Sure.
like it's kind of like someone can rise to the top, we can help that company rise to the top, then even better. I mean, there's one company here that did close down, that was like a coding school, which is a very unfortunate. But then right away another coding school came and go like, we'll help your students and we'll honor whatever money that they paid, and then we have other programs, and they collaborated. And I think,
Right. And that's the
it's
definition of community right there. Speaking about the ecosystem, and I did some preliminary like searches, and I saw that just dozens and dozens of all the different types of stakeholders that typically exist in a mature ecosystem. What would you say are the main nodes in the Vancouver startup ecosystem?
are you talking about groups
Yeah,
that like players and that
yeah,
ecosystem?
the main players, the big names, the one, yeah.
Okay, so the main names we have here is one's called Launch Academy. So they're being here like quite early. Every year they do a conference called Traction, and they bring people in from the valley. And it's very tactical. People talk about, you have the VCs interviewing their portfolio companies, very similar to like startup grind, something that you might see in the valley every day. But for Vancouver, that's like really, really beneficial. Another company is called Unbounce. They do landing pages. They do a call to action conference, and I went to one of the conferences. Like close to 30 countries come, to this. Mostly like on inbound marketing and digital marketing and strategies and copywriting and whatnot. And then of course like Slack and Hootsuite. In terms of up and comer, we have a digital supercluster program here. It's 900 million. BC got, I think, close to 160 or 180 million of it. And they're actually mandated to spend 60 million on solutions for COVID and also pandemic prevention. And so here the medtech space is very strong as well because of like UBC and the universities. And then the buy-in is actually starting to see the buy-in for a strong ecosystem. Everyone has to buy in and play their role.
Sure. Now, you just brought up the education. So colleges, universities, are they a large part of this?
Yeah, they're very much involved. I mean, they have their own kind of like programs, right? And so it can kind of like be fillers for what you're kind of like what the typical say lean startup, grow, measure, learn kind of approach. But yeah, they're in terms of like the entrepreneurial programs, like a lot of universities do have those. UBC, of course, is like a very strong also for clean tech, and
Hmm.
so like and there's also like Quantum. So Quantum, a company called D-Wave, and General Fusion as well. So there's a lot of like we say hidden tigers. There's so much like stuff happening, but because a lot of them are doing like enterprise, you don't really see them on a consumer level, or their market is the U.S. So one company that we did a chat with was called Later. So they grew out of like Launch Academy, and in particular they do Instagram. So very similar to Hootsuite or Buffer. They
Sure.
that kind of platform, but most of our clients are American. So we never kind of like see them around here. They have like a small office, but they're doing a lot, like they're doing good revenue.
Well, you clearly have your thumb on the pulse of your ecosystem. Really impressed with the position you have there. You'd mentioned that med tech is big. You mentioned that ag tech is prevalent. We have a question about of AI ecosystem in particular, because it's Elton who's participating. So, Elton, did you want to?
Sure. Okay, I mean, just night time for me, so that's why I didn't open up video. What I'm saying is that because there's some AI ecosystem, like Alberta, they came to Singapore. So like they have collaborations with agencies here in Singapore, like doing medical and also like just AI technologies learning exchanges. So I don't know whether Henry can add to that.
Um,
Yeah.
in terms of like ecosystem and AI in particular, is that what you're referring to? Are you talking like on a B2B level or more like a student kind of level? Because there are a lot of like camps that
B2B.
are on community. Yeah, like
or B2B, he said.
Okay, so in terms of B2B, there is a lot happening in that space. We do get a lot of delegations that come through Vancouver. A lot of those work with our Economic Commission, Vancouver Economic Commission, that works in that vertical. But in terms of, we're seeing a lot of like Asian interests here. And so a lot of like collaboration, cross collaboration going back and forth. And then not necessarily like in the AI space, but like Korea sent a delegation over for AR, VR to learn from here. And then also bring the companies here from Vancouver to Korea, show what they're working on and some of the gaps there. And so those collaborations are happening. I'm not really kind of like in the thick of like that space, but Vancouver Economic Commission would probably be a very good group to go talk to. That the other group is Innovate BC. So their job is actually to find partners and whatnot for the companies in BC in particular.
Sweet.
So from what you're describing, Henry, I'm sorry to interrupt, Corey, but from what Henry has been describing, the ecosystem is anchored on multiple nodes, both formal and informal. The formal ones are driven by both the local government of British Columbia, but also the federal government. At the same time, you have layers of innovation that are funded going back to the film industry origins and the mineral industry. You have a lot of risk takers. You have a well-established access to capital markets. So you have all the sinews to promote innovation. And it's not a surprise.
Culture as well.
Of course, I was going to come to this. It's not surprising then that you have both talent and investors coming from all over the world to Vancouver.
Yeah, I mean, the pieces are there. I think one of the challenges is, not say the lack of desire, but maybe being a little bit polite instead of like being like a global market leader. Very happy to sell off to the Americans, which I keep like, and the government is really working. Like what you're seeing is the government is like a lot of programs are like in Series A. So, okay, I'll invest your company if you have like $1 million, ARR, but a lot of companies don't hit that threshold. Mm-hmm. And ones that do hit that threshold, maybe doing more like B2B, and they already have those relationships. Like they're going to the US all the time. And
which of course brings the next question. What happens to valuation? How are valuations now compared to 6 months ago?
Valuation is like taking obviously a big hit. I mean, the valuations in like Vancouver or BC have always been lower than the Valley by 30 to 40%. And even like there's the talent, but it's also low cost of labor. So for an engineer that's making 130,000, say in Seattle, that's like US, and making 80, 90,000 Canadian here, right? And so you get a lot of people going across the border to work in the US as well. But then again, with like the immigration policies and things right now, you're seeing a lot of like American companies opening up in Vancouver. And so, for example, like MailChimp just opened up, and then, the big players like the Amazons and the Microsofts have been here for some time. MasterCard just opened like a cybersecurity center, $50 million cybersecurity center here. Shopify from Ottawa is like hiring 1,000 people here, but with COVID, we don't know what's going to happen with that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like happening here. But it's in terms of like streamlining the process, I think is one of the challenges, because if I'm an investor coming, inbound, like, if you can give me like a general, case of like here 3 to 5 that hit your criteria, I think a lot more economic development could be done in that speed. So people are coming that they have capital, that are like, not say risk adverse, but they're risk takers, and the opportunities here in a lot of ways are a lot more, not say stable, like tech is not always stable, but like in terms of the stuff is there for you to invest in. It's just like getting the message out there. And then also like in terms of like Canadian government, in terms of like blockchain. So there's a program called the Canadian Tech Accelerator, the blockchain part of the Canadian government. And so they're running programs as well, like in Seattle. And like the big players, like we have like Founder Institute. So I went through that program. We don't have like a Techstars, but the closest Techstars is in Seattle. So it's not that far away. So we have companies from Vancouver going there.
Yeah, and Techstars has interest in being international, absolutely. Like, and they've got quite the market cap on all the companies that have gone through there, almost 18 billion still. So, I've got 2 quick questions for you, but before I do that and wrap up, because we are coming up on a whole hour here of me being with you, I really appreciate that extra time. Before I ask you those questions, I want to open it up to George and see if he has any thoughts or specific questions for you related to what we've been talking about. Oh, you're still on mute then.
I'm sorry for that. The points that I wanted to raise as we're coming towards the close of our session, and it's not directly related to Canada, however, it's related to the markets. After this bank holiday today, we have a busy week ahead of us with consumer confidence tomorrow here in the US. We have a lot of news coming out of Europe and Switzerland. We have the Richmond Manufacturing Index on Wednesday. We have Canadian news at 8:30 in the morning on Thursday. The current account will be printed. We also have durable goods, consumer goods. Preliminary GDP will be on Thursday for the US. And Friday is also another very busy day with European news. So I just want to thank everyone for participating. Henry, thank you very much for your contribution.
No worries.
Yeah. So my last couple questions are for you, Henry. First is, what's been the one or two the most prevalent pieces of advice you've been giving your community as your phone's blowing up, your email's blowing up, your Slack's blowing up?
Learn fast, be agile, be nimble, and again, like be like startup cockroach and get into that mode of like not being complacent. Actually speed up the pace that you are working on. And then also like work to build relationships, like more collaborations. Like everyone's kind of like stationary. Everyone has like knowledge, like dig into that knowledge and then find the gaps that you're missing. And even if it's not like say local, move out of like, even out of Vancouver, talk to groups abroad and, similar to what we're doing with like Startup Grind right now. It's like, we're encouraging. I mean, we provide that roadmap for you. I mean, it's really up for you to kind of take that initiative and so don't be shy.
Right. Those are very important. Especially the don't be shy. I like that. And this is the first time I've heard that startup cockroach. I like that a lot. So thank you for that. And then last question, then I'll let George finish up. Is how can the Startup Grind community help you in Vancouver? Like, is there anything that we across the world can do for you?
I think it's just more opening the channels of communication is kind of one thing that we kind of like brought up, is understand which ecosystem, what are their strengths, what are their gaps, what are they missing. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily just like in like tech startup space, but like we had other chapter directors come here that are looking to immigrate here, and then more for their family, more so than themselves. So there's other like opportunities that come out of that. And I think just keeping the lines of communication open, and even like having whether it's like a database or something that we could do search through. Just like if you're an investor kind of database, like they invest in Series A, this vertical, these are the metrics that can have a kind of hit. I think having something like that would be really powerful.
Right. I think that stuff like that is probably going to come out of us becoming even more of a global organization through this. So yeah, George, some last thoughts before we say thanks to Henry?
Yeah, Henry, your points are so well taken. What we're beginning to see through our global interviews, as you've seen, we already had Pakistan, we will have Ghana, we have a growing, so to speak, roster of participants in our Startup Grind Real Talks. What we're beginning to see is that communication works against deglobalization. In other words, what is really happening is that you may have supply chain issues, but communication is now really picking up. And this is real communication. It's substantive. What you did today describing the Vancouver, so to speak, infrastructure, the ecosystem, is absolutely wonderful because you're making a presentation about a very successful model that can be easily emulated around the world. Thank you very much for your contribution. Very helpful indeed.
Anytime.
All right, George, do you have any last comments before we close out?
No, that's it. Just be careful, please, investors, entrepreneurs, and risk takers. We are hunting for the silver lining every day, and we welcome your contribution and your participation.
All right, great. I'm going to ask Henry just to stick back for a few seconds after we say their final goodbyes, but really appreciate you taking this time, Henry. You were one of the first to jump on and say, yeah, I definitely want to participate. Your ethic has been clear, especially when I met you in February at Global. Just a real great example of what it means to be part of this organization. So thank you so much.
I have a suggestion. Have you closed the interview?
Not yet.
Okay, well, yes, please do. After you do, I have a suggestion for.
All right, everybody. So we'll see you. We'll see you again on Wednesday, and then Friday we have 2 months of chock full calendar of checking in with Startup Grind directors, already booked and more coming in. So please tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can get the tickets at startupgrind.com/grand-rapids. And with that, we'll see you on Wednesday.